And if you're ready, we're going to get into the first topic. This is kind of a timely topic that has been happening because I used to live in New York. I lived there for 8 years, and recently they elected a new mayor, Zoran Mandani. And there's all this interest now and talk about socialism in America, in New York City. And if I was in New York, I would have fully supported Zoran if I could vote, but I can't. And I really do like some of the things that he was talking about. On top of that, Chinese people actually started to pay attention to him, First of all, they said he's very handsome. But more than anything, they said that they really liked what he was saying, They felt like it was a step in the right direction. But at the same time, some Chinese people were maybe a little bit skeptical as well, or disappointed or unsure. So there's been quite a mixed reaction, but Zoran has gotten a very big kind of warm reception in China. People are really talking about it, and it's not just like, oh, that's America's problem. It's kind of like, how will this impact America? And I think socialism as a whole in the world. So maybe let's start with you, Radhika. What are your general feelings about Zoran's election victory?
Well, I think that it comes at a very critical time in the history of the Democratic Party, the recent election in which they lost so badly. Have sent them into a tailspin of decline. And I think that essentially it marks the end of an era when the Democrats were able to win elections essentially through a fundamentally duplicitous strategy, a fundamentally dishonest strategy in which they got the votes of ordinary Americans, of working people. But in fact, they served the interests of the rich and the powerful, the big corporations and so on. And somehow, as long as things were going well, they managed to ride the two horses, which were kind of diverging already, but they managed to ride those two horses simultaneously. And it kind of worked. But I think as of the middle of the 2010s, when Trump first got elected, this strategy is no longer working. I think Trump figured out that you can no longer win elections by telling people that their economy is doing very well. He figured that out. But of course, he serves the same corporate capitalist class. So he then matched that with a lie about, how their economy was not doing well. He understood that they were suffering, something needed to be done, America had to be made great again, and so on. So he went on all this, but then he did not tell them the real reason why they were doing so badly, which is that for the last almost 5 decades, they have been pursuing neoliberal policies, and that this is what has deindustrialized America, taken away their good jobs, everything, increased inequality so obscenely, one could go on. And so they said, he didn't say that. Obviously, he can't, because he's going to continue the same policies. So he said, you are suffering because of China and trade and because of immigrants.
Right.
So what do we see now? He's making a big show of tariffs, which are on again, off again, but he has to look like he's addressing the concerns. And of course, he's terrorizing immigrants. So, the significance of the victory of Zoran Mandani is that he has won by essentially giving the alternative story. It's neoliberal policies that are bad. We need to replace them with socialist policies. And he's also managed to be rather Teflon on this whole anti-Semitism thing, because it would be very easy to characterize his support for Palestine as anti-Semitic, which is basically what has been successfully done to practically every left-wing politician in the West. So I would say that for all these reasons, I think it's great. Obviously, I think that the Democratic establishment will come out and try to defend the old way, but I don't think they will succeed. The real question is how many others will take the message, how many others will build that new type of politics, and of course, what they will do on foreign policy. But we will see about that. Right. Because on foreign policy, there has been this old tradition within so-called social democracy, what I call the guns and butter agreement. That is to say that we will agree with your imperialist foreign policy provided you give us a few reforms at home, welfare reforms at home. So we will agree with your guns so long as you give us a bit of butter. So the question is whether he will, obviously his support for Palestine is an important precedent or important marker. Let's hope that people like him, and if there is going to be a new reconstruction of left of center politics in the United States, that this is also taken on board.
Exactly. And I think actually Zoran's avid support for Palestine is actually what won over a lot of the votes of the socialists in New York, and the communists of New York, because that is a bold move to make, especially within the Democratic Party, because like you said, it's been such a dubious election where they have promised this and promised that in the last election, but then at the same time, we're bombing Palestine the entire time, which is, I think, a big reason why they lost so terribly. But I think you actually nailed it with the Chinese perspective. I think you and the Chinese netizens actually share very common ground, where the Chinese public is also saying, similar to you, maybe he is aligning, or I don't know, maybe he could be coerced into aligning with an imperialist agenda while providing welfare, while, essentially buying the hearts of people and saying, you can have cheaper groceries, but we'll continue to, do the foul stuff overseas, right? So we'll see. I think that's a great way to put it. Kyle, what about you? What are your thoughts about Zoran's recent election win? And you also used to live in the States, right? So what do you think about this as a whole?
Well, I think it's significant because Zoran is obviously not a candidate of the Democratic Party machine. He was not the designated candidate for the DNC. That would be Andrew Cuomo's. And him is really a popular candidate, voted from the bottom up. And I think it's also important to point out his opponents, the opponents of Zoran, both on the left and the right, they essentially made the Democratic primary for mayor of New York into a referendum on the issue of Israel and Palestine, with a smear of anti-Semitism charges. So Zoran's win is especially significant because this is New York City, the most Jewish city of the United States. And the tide has shifted. The tide has significantly shifted in the past year and a half. And now majority of the Americans, especially among the young, who are the major backer of Zoran, are now turned decisively against Israel and what they see as genocide committed on Palestinians. So I think all these anti-Semitism charges actually backfired. It made people realize, okay, we will prefer a candidate who take a strong stand, an ethical stand on the Israel-Palestinian issue. And here we have a young, charismatic, likable candidate, yet the Democratic Party machine is really trying to put him at arm's distance because they do not want someone like that. This is a reason Democrats have been losing elections in the past election cycles, because they don't give people the popular candidates that people actually want. This is what they did to Bernie Sanders back in 2016. This is how Trump won in the first place. And I remember that campaign. I was in the United States. I'm a citizen, and I remember that 2016 campaign really turned a lot of people, young people, onto the path of socialism, because they saw the old Democratic Party machine is so corrupt. That's a radicalizing moment for a lot of young people when they basically totally screwed over Bernie Sanders, trying to shoehorn Hillary into the candidacy. And the Democratic Party hasn't learned their lessons. They put out Biden, and lately they put out Kamala. All these candidates that does not appeal to American voters, especially the young people. So Zoran is a welcoming change, I would say.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I do really feel like this is a really pivotal shifting moment, right, that is happening in the States that is essential and necessary, and following all the stuff with Trump and the ICE raids and all of these different events that have literally been happening for 4 months, 5 months only. I think so much is being burst open. Carl, I wanted to follow up that question with you by asking you about, like you mentioned before, Americans now have a growing interest in socialism. So I want to ask you how you felt about that, what you think that idea of socialism is, and this goes for both of you, and how does that lead people to China? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think this is a reflection of the deteriorating conditions of American working class. Back during the Cold War, when there was intense ideological rivalry between United States and the Soviet Union, the U.S. ruling class had to make a lot of concessions to the working class in order to win their support. And this is why there was a lot of social welfare program that was implemented. And after the Cold War ended, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, now suddenly the ruling class of the United States feel they no longer need to share the spoils with the working class inside United States. This is why we have been seeing a growing inequality in the U.S. Now, if you look at the Gini coefficient, now we're back to the level of 1920s, before the Great Depression, to back to like the robber baron days of the United States. With all the wealth from globalization now is accrued to the top 1% and leaving the scrap for the 99%. This is what led to disillusionment of the capitalist system in United States. And this is why people are seeking alternatives. And this is a very critical juncture, because in a time of economic decline and diminishing economic prospect, people usually, either turn left or they turn right. It's either socialism or barbarism, socialism or fascism. And so right now, I think it's heartening to see at least significant people, especially young people, are expressing interest in socialism.
Absolutely. Radhika, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that Carl said, and I would add a couple of other things. So the first thing is that, you say, what will this socialism look like? So, I mean, obviously, we will have to see whether, it takes the usual form of, we'll accept the imperialist policies. And I think there are good reasons to believe that this will not be quite so successful, that sort of, imperial guns and butter sort of agreement, because American imperialism is also failing. Its capitalism is failing. Its imperialism is also failing. I mean, one of the reasons why you got the end of this war against Iran is not because the Americans had managed to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, but because they could not. And it was clear that they could not. And so what's the point? I mean, they are not capable of doing much more than that. So that's why we got the ceasefire. Similarly, recently in the confrontation between India and Pakistan, the superiority of Chinese weapons that were supplied to Pakistan over the Indian military's performance was manifest to everybody. And even in India, where they've been trying to cover it up, slowly things are leaking out and the government is ending up looking really bad. So imperialism is also not working. So I think there's hope for that. I would say one other thing, which is that, it's about time. I mean, I feel that for a while, first of all, over the last 4.5 decades, when neoliberalism has been applied in the United States, as in most Western countries, and I would say it's more than just the end of the Soviet Union. I mean, basically, the Reagan era is the beginning, and the Soviet Union still existed at that time. But whatever. I mean, the inequality has been increasing. But throughout all this time, this should have been the moment for the left. Socialism should have been strong. Because they should have opposed neoliberalism. Because neoliberalism is essentially not, it's not about markets and competition, which is what they say it's about. It's really about advancing the interests of the biggest corporations. It's about financialization and so on. And the left should have strengthened itself and should have attacked all this. But instead, essentially, the Democratic Party, the left of center forces, were essentially accepted the neoliberal settlement. And they had created their own sort of specific type of policies around that. And so what you've got is a rising tide of discontents, people who are not happy, but who until now has mobilized them? The right, Trump, Brexit, the alliance, the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, other right-wing forces all over Europe and the West more generally. So now we hear that in Britain, for example, Jeremy Corbyn and Zahra Sultana have creating a new party. We have yet to hear more about it, but all of these are good portents. The real question is, how far will they go? And now, are we in a position to wrest those sections of the working class that had gone along with Trump, bring them back? There's a better alternative. And the portents for that are good, because Trump with his big beautiful bill and all these ridiculous tariff measures, I think working people are recognizing that they, there's a very American expression, they bought a pig in a poke. A poke is a bag. So they bought a pig in a bag. They didn't know what it was like. So now they're discovering, now that the pig is coming out of the poke, they are discovering what it's really looking like. So I would say that the circumstances are good.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹润。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。